Okay, here we run live. Let's go, guys. So, for those guys who are maybe which will watch the recordings later, so let me say we are coming live because yes, tomorrow week 7 is ending. Okay, guys, everybody, chalo. Let's focus on the session, guys. Let's focus. Let's get started with the topic. Okay, so let's go. So tomorrow, week 7 is completing. Today is week number 7, day number 4, and tomorrow is our last day of week 7, which will be week 7, day 5. And we need to touch tomorrow morning topic of working with Redis. Okay, so Redis is nothing but for caching. We need it in our project. Also, we have a use case where we want to use Redis cache. So functional use case plus technicalities about it, everything we will discuss, and then you can include it in a project and then include it in the resume and then explain during the interview time. And it is very important topic, so mostly entire session will go in Redis related, plus we will do some discussion about how to go forward once these 2 months are completed, so that you can have maximum outcome and the further planning of that. Okay, so tomorrow we will be fully focusing on that topic. Then comes like what we are pending with one more topic, which is logging, and that is where we are doing it as part of right now call. Okay, so logging is very important for any project. In every programming language, logging support is very mandatory. Okay, and guys, please understand this important point. If logging is not there in the projects will not be deployed into production. Okay, so it is that important. Means you have to focus on functional coding plus very important logging. Simple thing, somebody is using a website or an application in production. If something goes wrong, then people want to know what has gone wrong. In future, you want to investigate what is going wrong. That investigation comes based upon logging. If you don't have proper logs in place, basically you cannot say what is going on in the application. It is that important of a feature. Without logging, projects will not be deployed into production. Every time you're writing functional code, people will expect you to put definite logging practice also. It is that important feature. Okay, we already know about logging, some basic stuff. What is that? Logging, okay, traces the flow of application. When one method is called, this method calls another method, that method is called another method. What is past data input in all of these methods? When the methods are processing certain logic, what are the variable values when those logics are processed? What output is coming back from the method? So nothing but data plus messages. The entire flow of application is tracked with logging. Okay, simply tracking the flow of application as it goes. And if you really see, right from day one, we are doing this kind of logging activity, and we can straight away go to, let's say, recon service. And here itself, these are nothing but log statements only, right? So when the method is starting to execute, we are mentioning, okay, so this so and so method is called now. Next, we go to the database. We load all the transactions. We print the size of the transactions. We convert it into DTO. We again see whether the conversion is proper and the end list is proper or not. Then we start processing one by one each transaction. Then we are printing each of the transaction also, right? What is not this? Tracing the application. If you don't write these statements, still code is going to run. But if something goes wrong, we will not even know where the problem has happened. That is where logging is so important. Okay? It tells the flow, it tells the tracing. And guys, do you know this thing? Okay, what happens is there are certain projects. I have also been working with some of these projects where the client said, okay, maintain logs for around 20 years. Nothing but when you run this code, these statements will be written in some file, some place, I was into certain projects where the clients mentioned maintain these logs for 20 years. Means you cannot delete these logs. They said production logs should be maintained for 20 years. Even let's say up to 20 years, anytime some customer comes and says, like 19 years ago, I did so and so on your application. Tell me about it. What happened? System should be able to tell that. Crazy requirement. So that means logging is not just important, but the log outputs which are generated, it needs to be maintained also for long time, depending upon the project. Very easily 5-year support will be there by anybody. Some companies might give 10-year support. Some are even going to like this. Some people say lifetime support for inquiry also, right? So crazy situations are there. The end conclusion you should understand is logging is very important for application. Without logging, we cannot deploy into production. Logging traces the flow of the application, and the logs needs to be maintained for long time for debugging purpose. These are the main conclusions. Okay, so logging is very important for any application. Okay, without logging, we cannot deploy into production. Okay, next, logs will be maintained for long time. Logs will be maintained for long time, many years. Okay, for long time. Next, it is for tracking the flow of the application, how your code is running, everything is going to be tracked. So this is what is the basic importance of logging. Okay, so without logging, nothing is going to work out nicely. And furthermore, for any kind of debugging, okay, for any debugging, logging is needed. Even though breakpoints and other things are there, but it is still slow, right? One by one, line by line. But in general, you can go to logs, and that is your first level analysis to find what is going on. If that is not giving you clarity, then next level you go to the Eclipse based debugging kind of debugger, right? Eclipse debugger for debugging purpose. That is second level. Initially you go to the logs, you check from that. It is a faster approach compared to IDE based debugging. Okay, so logs are really mandatory for the application. Okay, now let's go in further more details about this. Okay team, are we clear with this? So logging is important. That should be your conclusion with this activity. Logging is important. Without logging, we cannot deploy. As simple as that. Must and should, we need to know it. Okay, simple. Now the thing is, okay, chalo, let's move forward, guys. Good, everybody. Let's move forward. Now the thing is, how to do logging. One of the simple approach, right from core Java times, we all learn is nothing but system.out.println. That is also doing logging only. When the application is executed, some statements you write, some values you write, and you know that how important it is. Based upon this, right from day one, Hello World application is starting with this only. So it is very important to track anything which is going on. Okay, but important conclusion here. Already on the day one itself, we realized system.out.println should not be used in your projects. Instead of this, we need to use something called as loggers. Okay, so loggers are nothing but some other classes, and it will have some methods. We need to use these in order to print the values, log the values, not use system.out.println. Okay, why exactly? We already know the reasons also for that, guys. Okay, the main reason, just see, right now if you run this code, okay, let's do this quick thing. I will start this payment processing service, right click, run as Spring Boot app. Okay, by the time it is coming up, let us simply go to some addition controller, test controller, which we have written here. This is a recon method. For experimenting purpose, we will comment this and play around with some logging capability. Okay, So guys, everybody, please put some focus here. It's a simple concept. I think some of you might already be aware of all these things, but still from basic we will start so everybody gets the same clarity about all these facts. Okay? So yes, we are starting with this. One is a logger statement, logger.info. Today we will understand all these things in detail. So we are printing a value there. And another one, let's do system.out.println, this one. So both are going to do the logging. We have added both the statements. Let's call it from Postman and see what the values will be. Okay, so we added this. Go to Postman. This is our local recon. Call the local recon. Executed. Just see what has happened. This above statement, let's watch the end of this. So we are writing this statement, addition controller trigger called. But when we write it with logger.info, a different pattern of logging, we get so much additional information. Okay, what is that additional information? In which class it is also written? Addition controller. Next, which thread is eligible for this? Which service is doing that work? Next, info related mode, process ID, and the timestamp also. And if you see system.out.println is the statement below that, only the message is printed. Okay. So what does this mean? The default nature when you use system.out.println prints only this, but these other things are very important. Every time timestamp based, thread based, we needed it for multiple times while we were building the project, right? So this additional information is mandatory. That is one of the reasons why system.out.println is not required. We should not use it. Okay? That's one of the reasons. So loggers give detailed values. From coding perspective, you write only message, but values are coming by default. That is so nice, right? So loggers provide detailed values and system.out.println only text message. When I was beginner, fresher, I used to think, so what happens? In system.out.println also we will print thread, we will print date. But just imagine, in the entire project, if for every system.out.println you want to write that along with your statements, that's not a practical solution. Okay, and that is the reason somebody else has already done that. If you say, no, I will define my custom library, my custom Java class, which will override this system.out.println, technically all those things can be done. But why you want to do all that? There are ready-made libraries which are doing the same work. Then why do you code and do the similar nonsense? Not required. Existing systems are there, very stable systems are there, and pretty nice. We can simply use that one. Okay, so that is the first value of differentiation. Okay, with this plain text message is coming, with this detailed values are coming. Okay, now let me tell you a second major problem, guys. Because what happens is, let's say you're writing a program, a method. Okay, this method is having a for loop. Let's say this loop runs around 100 times. Inside this for loop, there is another for loop. Nested loops will be there sometimes. Okay, let's say this loop runs 10 times. Okay, now just imagine these are the curly braces to inform. Please understand the second problem. This is really concerning. So we said logs are important to tell the trace of the application. And if you start using system.out.println, so what you will do is, okay, let's say you want to trace all of these aspects. So just imagine you will write some system.out.println here. Then you will write maybe something in this for loop. Then you will write something in this for loop because you want to see the trace, what is happening to the values. Now you need to understand, Okay. This statement, so this statement is going to be printed one time because it is just outside all the for loops. Method is executing one time. This statement is printed 100 times. Think about it. Every time the for loop runs in the log file or the console, 100 times this statement is printed. And this statement is even more crazy. 100 into 10, 1000 times this statement will be printed. Now you can imagine, guys, what's going to happen with this. 1000 times this statement is going to be printed. Now what is happening? Every time for single request, this entire file is going to print around 1000 plus log statements. For one method, you're doing that. Just imagine you call so many methods and unnecessary, so much of statements will be printed on the file. You can imagine when many customers are using the project, it automatically comes like so much of data will be generated and the size of the files will be very crazy, very big. And then we have to maintain such big files also. And maybe majority of this data might not really be needed in production. Still, you are printing all the values. Okay, so now this is a very confusing situation. One side, the project is saying you should have nice tracking in the project so that you can debug on the application. On the second side, if you put very detailed tracking, you're adding too much to the file size. And then people might say, in production, we want to maintain this for 20 years. They might simply say, we don't want this kind of logging in production. For one method, you have printed 1000 lines. That's crazy. Remove it. Your managers and clients will say, 1 GB of files are coming every minute. What is this? Per day, 10 GB, and then multiply it over a lifetime. Huge file sizes. Too much disk space gone. And they will say, do you really need to print all these in the production? Then the developer might say, maybe during production not required, but while we are doing development and testing, definitely there it is required. So are you getting, we have a new requirement here. Maybe some of the statements are needed during development time, during non-prod related activities. However, same code, when it goes to production, we don't want those file statements because it is going to be maintained for 20 years. For one method, 1000 lines is really impractical. Okay. And that is the reason people will say, okay, hey, don't log so much in production. And then you will say, but we need it in non-prod. So try to understand, there is a problem here. The problem is developer wants detailed tracking, but only in non-prod. But these statements should not go in the production system. How can you achieve that? Will you delete all these statements before you deploy in production? Think about it. Kaise karenge? Non-prod mein you need it in code. Production mein you should not. Will you remove it? Will you comment it? Let's say if you commented it. So we have multiple branches. You cannot have like integration branch, feature branch, some other code, production branch, some other code. No, it should be finally merged into one, right? So it's not possible to maintain different copies. You cannot do like this. Non-prod, you have this uncommented. Prod, you have it commented. That kind of working is not going to happen. Once you comment it in prod, even when you come on non-prod, it will be in commented state. Then for testing, do you have to again uncomment everything? Just try to imagine. It is impractical. Too much of problems. Okay. So what is the problem statement here? During non-prod, okay, devs might need some statements for debugging purpose. Okay. However, it should not run in prod system. It should not run in prod system because it is adding too much to the file size. Okay. So 1000, 1K lines per method, per request, that is crazy. 10 requests comes and this becomes like what, 10,000. This is so much information. And what if in the same for loop, 2 times you do it? Just imagine, right? Developers are developers, they will write. There is certain business logic here. They said, now I want to print that also. Very easily, you are doubling up the entire load. So it is very chaotic and problematic. And this is the problem statement. During non-prod, developers might still need these statements for debugging, but it should not run in production, because 1K lines, 2K lines per method, per request coming, it is really impractical. So how do you achieve this state? Write some statements, but it should run only in the non-prod, not in the prod systems. With system.out.println, it is not possible to take care. Okay? So speaking about very obvious problems, first problem is log patterns is not detailed enough. The second major problem is this kind of thing. Log statements which you write are going to execute wherever the code is. You cannot differentiate between systems. There is no provision for that. Okay? And furthermore, there are some other possible problems. System.out.println is slow in nature. Okay? It can be more faster, more optimized, which logging libraries have done in. So the third major problem is in terms of performance. Performance wise, working with SOPs for bigger systems really slows the system down. Rather, if we can have a better solution, it is going to be even more nicer as well. So these are some serious problems working with system.out.println, and we need certain solutions here. Okay, and I think we have put in some nice document for this logging purpose also. By end of today, we will even be sharing these details with you as well. So as part of that, we have a short overview of some experiments which we can do with logging. We will be doing those experiments, taking some reference from this document. Okay, so these are the top 3 major problems. Performance problems. SOP is comparatively bad. Other logging libraries are optimized, and because their primary work is to do logging, and they have done it in a very nice manner. So that is the third problem which we can see. Okay. Another problem which you can note down is system.out.println by default writes to one output stream. By default, system.out means it prints on the console. If you want to move it into a file, how can you do that? You want to move something into a file. You can override system.out redirection also. Okay, maybe some of you might have experimented. Instead of when you do out.println, rather than writing to a console, write it to a file. You can override that behavior. However, at one point, it will write to one output, and by default, it is console. But guys, console-based outputs are temporary in nature. You need to write things in files. So that is the fourth major problem with system.out.println. Okay, generally you write it to console, and console is nothing but temporary. Okay, temporary in nature. We need to write to files. And if you say, we will change the system.out.println behavior to write to files, let me tell you, projects might have requirement that different statements should be written in different files also. Sometimes those requirements will be there. Okay, for example, all the logs you want to write in, let's say, my file.log, logs will be stored in something called as .log file. You might say all the statements should be printed in myfile.log. However, all these statements of HTTP service engine should be printed in a different log file. These kind of requirements can be there. Or you might also put something called as error.log file and say anytime an exception comes, that should be printed in a different log file. So what is happening? In practicality, there might be cases where you don't always want to write end destination into only one place. Depending upon your use cases, you might have to write on different files also. With system.out.println, such capabilities are not there. One time you modify, it modifies for everything. How will you keep changing this always? So it is really very hard. And after all of these things, it is a standard conclusion in production systems. We should never use system.out.println. We need something else because of these some of the challenges that we discussed. Okay, so we cannot use system.out.println in prod, and these are the some of the major challenges with it. What we want is some new library needed to take care. Okay, guys, are we clear with this? Are we clear with the current situation? Okay, it's very much straightforward. These 3-4 major reasons you understand, no need to spend more time on that. It is a default conclusion which everybody in IT knows. No SOP, that's it. Use logger, that's it. Okay, fine, good, thanks for confirmations, guys. Let's continue forward. Okay, let's continue forward. Good everybody. Now comes, okay, libraries are there, which libraries we should use? Guys, देखो, for everything multiple options are there, multiple libraries are there. Okay, so JUnit also we saw multiple libraries are there. Instead of for JSON to string conversion, object conversion, there also multiple libraries are there. Google has given JSON. Spring Boot default is using Jackson. So nothing but for doing same thing in the market, multiple options are available. Same situation is applicable for logging also. Multiple solutions are available. Now, depending upon which one is the right, people make a decision. Okay? So for a very long time in the Java related community, one of the framework of logging which really picked up was log4j. Okay, so it's a pretty old library. Since a long time it was being utilized, log4j. Okay, and then guys, what happens? The world keeps evolving, system requirements keep changing, the softwares and the libraries, they always keep evolving. So then what happened? Earlier, this log4j itself was very commonly used, adapted by a lot of people. Then what people did is they came up with better version of log4j and they came up with the next upgrade, log4j2. So nowadays in the projects, if you want to use log4j, the option available is go ahead with log4j version 2. Don't use the previous one. Still, some legacy projects might have it, but they are still recommending instead of using this, go ahead with this one. So if it is about using log4j still in your project, you have to go ahead with log4j2. Okay. However, the developers of log4j guys itself, they further analyzed and realized there is an area of improvement in this logging, and they came up with a new library, okay, which is also now widely used, and it is the default one along with your Spring Boot application, which is logback. Logback library. Again, library means some POM dependency will be there, some jar will be there. But when we say it is coming as a default with Spring Boot, means you don't have to add it. It is already there in our project. So the default behavior means some standard systems are there and they have really checked it and then made it as a standard. That is where JUnit made it as a standard. Logging library, logback, they are making it as a standard. So it is good, stable, and you don't have to then add any other additional dependency. Simply work with logback. Okay, so this is already default available in Spring Boot system. Okay, and we are going to work with logback related library itself. Okay, now guys, they could try to imagine what are these libraries. Think with just logical sense, you will get nice clarity about it. We are saying don't use system.out.println, use some other library. What does it mean to use some other library? Entire Java is, guys, what? Class will be there, object will be there, you will create some object and then you will call some method. That is what is entire Java programming. Classes, method, jars, classes, method. इसी में पूरा जावा खत्म हो जाता है, right? This is what is Java. Having a jar in which there are classes, interfaces, you somehow get some object, you call certain methods. That is the entire programming concept, just summarized in 3 words: classes, objects, methods, just invocation. Now, what we are saying is, instead of system.out.println, which is used for printing statements, we want to use something else. But just think about it. What will be that something else? Again, it is going to be object of some class and some method you call on that object, right? This is what it is. For example, system.out.println is what? Println is a method which is available in the out object, and out object is defined inside your system class. That is what it is. So when you go here, if you do this out object F3, so out is an object of print stream which is defined inside java.lang.system. Nothing but just programmatically understand, it is nothing but some class ka object, and on that object you call a println method. And there is some business logic around println. That's what you can see, synchronized in nature, right? So it is synchronized in nature. It might slow things down, it might lock things down at times, right? So a lot of things could be causing some problem with system.out.println. Now we need to really understand the way you call a method on an object. We are now saying, don't use this, use some other class and call some other method. So we just need to understand which class to use, which method to use. That's it. Work will be the same, print, but which class, which method, and in which jar this is available. If you can answer these 3 questions, you can simply work with logging. Now what happens? Let's imagine you want to work with log4j2. They might give some class, some method. The name of that class could be whatever. The name of the method could be whatever. Similarly, logback might provide its own class, its own method. And not just this, in the market, several other logging frameworks are available. For example, Java by default is also providing some logging framework. Some of the projects might just use that and not use these libraries also. Okay, then Apache company is also providing some logging frameworks. So just imagine, everybody will provide its own class, own method. Just imagine, let's put it up into a diagram, guys. Let's put it up into a diagram. In the market, multiple logging solutions are available. Let's say log4j. Okay, next log4j2, log4j2, next logback, next Apache logging, and etc. Several tools might be there. They all might provide their own classes and their own methods. Okay, so let's say this guy provides whatever class X to class X, and its method is print. Okay, let's say this guy provides, I'm just giving example, okay, class Y, and its method is, let's say, write. Logback provides, let's say, class Z, and its method is, okay, print, write, okay, stamp. I'm just making some names out here. So freedom is up to those libraries, right? Which class they use, what names of the methods they use. They will like to make it standard, but it's up to them. Whatever names they want to choose, whatever methods they want to choose, accordingly they will do. And now just imagine, in our project, if we want to use any of these libraries, so first we will add their jar file, and then we have to learn which classes of that library, which methods of that library should be used for what purpose. And just imagine, in your entire project code, if you start writing those classes and those methods, in future, if you want to change the library, you have to basically change the entire project code. Every file you have to rewrite. So that means switching the library will become impossible once you start using any one of the library, right? So right now, let's say after doing a lot of analysis, if we say we want to go back with logback, what will happen? In your entire project, logback related imports will be there. Logback related class names will be there. Logback method names will be there. Similarly, if you choose anything else, those things will be there. In future, if you want to change, it will become impossible because each and every Java file you have to modify. You will go ahead, add a new dependency in your POM, and then in every code, you have to change every single line, create a new logger object of new library, and then import that one. Basically, you need to touch all the Java files, and which is a pretty impossible task. And then what will happen? You will not change the library. Even though older libraries might be there, problematic libraries will be there, but you will be like, come on, changing so much of code, let's not do that. And in future, better solutions might still keep coming, and you are still living with legacy system because changing that is a lot of work. And the market very soon realized that it is inflexible, it is problematic. So what they did, okay, they came up with a standard. Industry is very smart. They realize, oh, this is the problem, and then projects are stuck, they are not able to move. So what is required? Some solution should be there, some standardization should be there, where developers get the flexibility to use any framework without changing code. Think about it. You can use any framework whichever you want without changing any Java code. You should be able to take the capability. Means you have to write one-time Java code. Just see what is the requirement. You need to write one-time Java code. Whatever class you will use, whatever method you will use, Java coding will be done one time. Behind the screen, you can change the framework without any change in code. It should work properly. People kept that as the target. How to achieve this? Very interesting problem to solve. And some of the smart guys, they came, how about let's make a standard? Something which is common for all of these people. And what that standard is, nothing but SLF4J is that standard. SLF4J is that common standard which the community defined and said, okay, all of the popular frameworks, they said, you implement SLF4J, some standards which are defined by SLF4J. All the popular frameworks in the market, you implement SLF4J. SLF4J will define one set of, let's say, some interfaces and methods. Standard, one name of the interface, one name of the method. And every developer is supposed to use that while you do the coding. Guys, how the interfaces work? So interfaces are like one standard naming. So you just add those parent names and use those methods. Behind the screen, these jar files will implement those interfaces, and in your class path, whichever jar file is configured, that's business logic is going to execute to run that functionality. That is SLF4J standard. They defined a specification, they defined a standard, and they said all the popular players of the market implement these set of interfaces and methods, and you provide your implementation. But these are the standard method names, and these are the interfaces which you have to override. Next, they started doing that. Their jar files were there. You just need to add these jar files in your class path. Whenever in your entire code, you have to work with these interfaces and methods which are defined by SLF4J standards. Behind the screen, in your class path, whichever jar file is there, that execution is going to happen. If you want to change, only your POM dependency may switch to some other guy no change in Java, and it will work. That's the power of standardization and SLF4J. And guys, this is not the first time where such kind of standardization has happened. If you have learned JDBC more detailed, there also you will realize Java team has given a specification of how connection class should be, how driver manager should be, and all these vendors of the market, Oracle, MySQL, PostgreSQL, Microsoft SQL Server, they all implemented those standard specification. So this kind of concept is applied at multiple cases. They applied during logging also. Standardization. If you directly work with this, maybe you have to use their classes, import them in your code, and then changing is going to become a nightmare. You will never change. So, but when you work as per standards, you are importing only the standard names. In your entire code, only standard naming is going. So that is the reason. But under the hood, you can change whatever, still your code has zero changes. This is really powerful. So as a developer, you need to learn SLF4J. You need to understand what classes or interfaces to use, which is standard for all of these guys, and what methods to use, which is again standard for all of these guys. Internally, it is their headache, what implementation they have done for that. It is not our responsibility to even understand it. Just add these jars in the class path, you will get the effect accordingly. And Spring Boot by default is providing this support for SLF4J. Oops, how do we? Okay, here it is. Spring Boot is providing the default support for SLF4J and logback. It is by default supporting this. And right from the day one, if you see, we are using this solution itself. So guys, clear, understood where is where, why we have to go for that, why not use these libraries directly, what is the problem? Guys, are we clear with all this? Okay, very interesting. IT where there is a need, that is where there are solutions. Okay, good everyone. Good. Now let's go further. Okay, let's go further. You can find all this information on internet, do some exploring, you can nicely find these things. Now, for example, there is this SLF4J direct website. Okay, so SLF4J, you can go there and they have very nicely explained all these things there in detail. Okay, so this is a basic manual of SLF4J. They have put a nice diagram also here, which tells how SLF4J can nicely integrate with whatever other underlying libraries that you are using. Okay, so main thing is, when you write your application, you need to work with only SLF4J related libraries. For that, they have provided their classes, interfaces, methods, standards into some of the jar file called as slf4j-api.jar. Under the hood, they might be interacting with whoever required and doing the required work. So here in their documentation, they explained how these libraries work and other things about it. Okay, but just understand this high level. From application perspective, we just need to work with SLF4J library. Okay, fine. Now, how to create a class and a method which is alternate to system.out.println as per SLF4J style. Okay, what they have provided is, just see, they have given some code snippet also here, guys. If you scroll up, this is what is that statement which we can use. Logger factory.get logger. Whatever is the name of your class, you pass the name of that class. And then logger factory, just see, both of their packages are org.slf4j, because slf4j is that top standard. So org.slf4j.logger log factory, that's it. So that means if you write a statement like this, it is independent of any underlying logging framework. It is a standard one. So you're not importing any logback related stuff directly with you. Your entire Java code is built to use only common standard. Means in future, if you want to change, it's very easy. You don't have to do anything there, right? So how do you do that? Simple, just this kind of a statement. Both logger factory and logger is defined in org SLF4J itself. Where the implementation is coming, now those guys have internally their SLF4J libraries and core log providers, let's say logback. Those guys would internally create the required objects and give you. It is least a headache of the developer to think of that. They have done it already. For us, we can simply do like this and create the object, right? They have, I think, given more examples out of it also. Yeah, basically a hello world starting simple example they have provided. It is that one itself. So let's create it like this. So we copy this full statement, copy, go to the code, okay, and then simply put it here. It's already available here. Okay, in our main addition controller of processing service, just see that same statement is already available. Logger factory dot get logger, and then you have to specify whichever class you are defining, that name dot class you have to specify accordingly logger, and then Control Shift K, import is coming from org.slf4j itself. Okay, so this is what it is, and then you can use this logger. So one thing, which class to use? Okay, logger object class to use. How to create an object of this? Using this way we can create object for that. So we were having these questions. System.out.println, okay, we use, but now we need something else. We need an object of some class, and then we need to call some method. So what object to use? For that, we understood this point of SLF4J. And how do you create an object of that? Is using this statement. Okay, wonderful. Okay, using this statement, we can create it. Now, this guy was providing println method. Now, what kind of methods does this library provide? And SLF4J is a standard, so we will learn the standard. What are the popular methods provided by SLF4J? Currently, in our entire code, we have always used info, info, info. But you need to understand, they have given multiple methods also for this. Nothing but they have provided some methods called as debug, trace, info, warn, error. Like these, multiple methods are there which can be used for logging purpose. They all have a different purpose. Okay, so we need to understand which one to use, where to use. So that's what is the second thing we have to understand. First, object creation is taken care. Now the next point is info we are using, when to use info, and what are these other methods. That is the next point we have to understand. Okay, but like we are saying, there are multiple possibilities. Logger.debug is there. Next, logger.error is there. Logger.warn is there. Logger.trace is there. Just see GitHub Copilot has helped us to fill that one quickly. All these possibilities exist. There are multiple methods which we can write. Okay, that's the first learning conclusion we have to take. Okay, for writing log statements, multiple methods are available. Okay, now what is the significance of these methods? Okay, what is the significance of these methods? Simple, guys. Okay, there is some logic around it which we have to understand. There is an order of priority. How can I explain this better? Let me do some arranging of these statements. At the top, I am writing trace. There is an order for these levels, for these statements. Trace, then debug, then info, then warn, then error. Okay, I just arrange these statements in an order: trace, debug, info, warn, error. Okay. Okay, now let me just save this piece of code. This is our system.out.println, and after that we have all of these statements. Now let's call it from our Postman. Let's see what happens behind the screen. This first line is our system.out.println. After that, guys, observe, even though we have written trace, debug, and 5, what we are seeing is only 3 are printed. So that means there is further logic also which is operating here. Logging libraries have provided multiple log methods. Okay, and even though we have used all of those methods, printing wise only this has happened. Okay, multiple learnings here. There is something called as priority of these log statements, and this is the order of priority. Just for now, just understand. Okay, there is the order of priority. There is priority for these log statements, and the order is whatever is defined in this one. First, trace is the lowest priority, then debug, then info, then warn, and then error. Right now, something happened in the system, and all the statements, only info and above are printed. Before debug, it is not printed. That means greater than equal to, error is greater than equal to warn. Error is greater than equal to info. There is an order for all this. It's a scale basically. If you go to error, that means it's the highest priority. Next warn, next info, next debug, next trace. So there is some order of execution. Now what is happening, guys? Now this is interesting, please understand. At Spring Boot application level, there is a default setting which allows only info and above statements to be printed. Listen this part very carefully. Even though in the entire project code, you might have written all these kind of statements. When to use what statement, we will discuss that. Right now, we are not discussing when to use each of the statement. That's the next topic. Right now, what we are trying to understand, logging library has provided multiple methods. But even though we use all the methods, printing wise, it is not printing all the methods. Rather, it is printing info and above, info, warn, and error. It excluded trace and debug. Why did it exclude that? Now we are understanding a new concept. At Spring Boot application level, default logging is set to info. Let's write a statement about it. At Spring Boot level, default logging is set to info. So only info and above statements will be printed. So which nothing but info, warn, and error. Baki ke statements will not be printed. Some configuration is there at Spring Boot level. And guys, you need to understand this. When we deploy our project in production also, it will be enabled only for info mode, means info, warn, and error. Only these 3 will be printed. When we deploy our project in production, there also the default info capability will be enabled all throughout. Okay. So then what is the purpose of trace, debug? One by one, we will understand it. But right now what we are getting, there is some Spring Boot level configuration which is saying set to info, and it is printing only info and above statements. And if you really observe, guys, देखो, now observe here, this is really interesting. थोड़ा सा focus is required. I am making some space changes and saving this. What happened when we made this space change and saved it? Spring Boot application came up. Spring Boot application came up. From this place, Spring Boot application came up. Observe all these statements which are written info, info. That means everything info. Had there been a warn or an error, it will also be printed. So that means default is set up at info. But try to observe the another thing here. As part of this info, not just our classes, this payment processing service application is our class, that is fine. But even these other classes which are inside the Spring framework, something called a generic scope, bean factory ID, it created. It is printing it in info mode. Next, Tomcat web server, standard service, nothing but in our class path, multiple other jar files are also available. In the jar files also log statements are there. At Spring Boot level, logging is set to info means all of the jar files in our project code in the class path, all the jar files, whatever log statements they have written in info mode, they are also printed. So please understand, when you are writing your project, your code is running plus the code of the jar files are also running. In the jar files also log statements are written and that is also printed here. That's powerful. So not just Spring framework related, but even Tomcat web server, okay, or something else. But please be aware, it is all visible like this. Okay, so that's the next conclusion. We have multiple jar files in our class path, which is also implemented in Java, right? In that also log statements are available. Now we are saying at Spring Boot level, default logging is set to info. This is applied even to these jar files. Okay, so let's write down that conclusion. Because at Spring Boot level, log is set to info. So for all the jars in the class path, also info and above statements are printed. And that is what we are able to see here. Okay, everything is like that. All of these are defined by somebody else, but it is also printed in info mode. They might also have debug statements, but it is not coming here. Why? Because at Spring Boot level, the default log is set to info. So only info and above will be printed, which means info, warn, and error will be printed. Okay, now comes the question. Can we change this Spring Boot level log configuration? Okay, so our next question is, can we change Spring Boot level log configuration? Yes, it is possible to change. Simply by adding one property file, you can change the behavior. Okay, it is called as, there are multiple things to there. First, let's understand, it is something like logging.root. Okay, you just need to set up at logging.root level equal to whatever level you want. For example, you make this debug. If you make this just in a property file, just add this statement logging.root.level equal to debug, means, guys, we said there is a priority order to all. Means, if you put it like this, means across your code and all the jar files which are there, plus the Spring Boot code also, right? It's also a jar file. So our code plus all the jar file code, every line during execution, every line which has debug, info, warn, error will be printed in the console. So if you change this root level logging, currently it is set to info. So if it is set to info across your code and all the jar file, it prints these values. If you change it into debug, then it will print, okay, debug these values. If you change to info, then it prints these values. If you change it to warn, then it prints only these values. It's a priority. If you change it to error, it will print only these values. And if you change it to trace, then it is going to print these values. That means in your entire Java code, you might use logger.trace, logger.debug, info, warn, the way we have given example here. In your entire project, you are using these kind of statements. Okay, in the entire exam project, you are using these statements, but which statement to print and which not to print is controlled by a logging level configuration. And when you say root means applies for all your code plus all the jar files which are there in your class path. Whenever code runs in all of you guys code, library code plus our code, based upon this log level, it will decide whether to print the statement or not. Okay, let's see it practically. Okay, so here we can simply, this is what example, logging dot level dot root. Okay, the order is a bit different. Logging dot level dot root. So here, so yes, again, right, internet and all gives us the proper values of these keys and stuff. So this is the configuration. Logging dot level dot root we can set up to whatever. Let's try to change the root logging level. Currently by default it is set to info. Because of that reason, even though we have written all the 5, but only these 3 are coming, and all these other guys also only info is coming. Now we are trying to change it. So let's go to application.properties, and here let's simply add logging.level.root to debug. Okay, and now let's do a save and let the application start up again. Guys, observe what is happening. Boom, debugs are coming, infos are coming, and guys, it is not stopping. There are some libraries, they're continuously trying to work behind the screen. Some libraries, just see HTTP connection pool which is created. We set some eviction policies and all. Just observe. It is continuously working. Earlier, even though it was running earlier, we did not see this because all the jar files were set to info mode, and these are something in debug mode. When the developers of these people, the jar file guys, when they are developing this library, at that time they will run it in a debug mode so that they can investigate what is happening. But when other people of the world, for example us, we are using it, why should we really need to know what these guys are doing internally? Not required to know. But observe, important thing here, we changed root level logging to debug, and all of a sudden, from whatever jars are there in the class path, any code which is running right now, even debug statements are printed here. Okay, and if you check it, so this is like continuously, it's not stopping, it's going on and on and on. Right, that is the reason production always runs in info, because this kind of thing of other jars also should not be visible to us. Production runs on info. That statement you have to always remember. Okay, always in prod, info log level will be set. This people call it as the log level. Trace, debug, info, warn, error, these are called as log levels. You can relate it like that. Okay, and now imagine, okay, we have also done some method, but this guy is not ready to stop itself, right? But let's call from our postman and see what is happening. Okay, what we will do is, okay, let's call it from our postman. Shoot, okay, called. Just check this thing out. Wait. Okay, yeah, just observe this. We called our method trigger recon, and as part of trigger recon, just observe this thing. This time debug also came. So 4 statements came this time. Earlier 3 statements only came: info, warn, and error. So that means greater than equal to logic is applied or not. So when you set up log level at debug, then debug, all the statements in the code which is written in debug, info, warn, and error will be printed. So this is what we shared as part of this. When you set the root level, root means it applies to your code also, plus all the jar files, means everything. Root means everything. But if you change that into something, it applies for everyone. If you change it into trace, trace is more granular. Even more statements you might see if you move it to trace. Okay, then comes debug is one level above that. So debug, info, warn, error will be shown. Above that is info, so it will cover only these 3. Then comes warn, then comes like this. Accordingly, the log statements will be printed. So that is nothing but root level logging. So there are 2 things. One side is on application side. So right now let me make it info. That's the default one, but we will just put it like that. Now just see, only info related statements of other jars plus our only info statements will be printed here. And that's what we want. We don't want to see that infinite, they are doing something in their jars. Project will become so much confusing. So that is the reason here. Okay, 2 things we need to understand in the project code: how to use this add controller. We have to use these things, but at the application level, some log level is set which defines whether the statements will be printed or not. Okay, so we need to learn 2 things here. One is how to use the log level methods in the project. The second one is, okay, there is some application level configuration which will determine whether your log statement will be printed or not. Okay, so 2 things, 2 aspects are here. Guys, are we clear with this? Are we clear, team? Give a quick thumbs up. So log levels are there, greater than equal to is there, even though we are writing, but whether it is printed or not depends upon external configuration. And what is this external configuration? It applies to you also, it applies to all the others if you play with root configuration. Okay, but now guys, dekho, we are doing some development. Good, thanks for confirmation. Let's resume back. We are doing some development. We are not interested in what other guys have done in their jar files. We want them to run in info only, but for us, for our testing, we want to change it to debug. We want to change it to info, let's say trace also. When to use trace, when to use debug, we will discuss that shortly. But let's say we want to now change for our application. If we change it at this level, application.properties, if we change at root, it is applying for all those jar also, which is written by other people, and this is becoming an infinite scroll, right? We don't want that. It's waste of our time. So root level we want to set info, but our other problem is in our application, we want to do testing at trace level, debug level. So our need is root should continue to be in info, but our project should run in a trace. Can we do that? That is our next problem. Because if we change this itself into trace or debug, it is doing it for all the jars, and unnecessary time-waste logs are being visible to us. We don't want to see what is going on in the other logs. We just use the libraries. They should work internally. We are interested to know what we have done so that we can do our development properly. So how exactly we can do that? Okay, it's also possible. Okay, so let's write down first the problem statement here. Okay, how to use logs we have to learn. Second is log level configurations we have to learn. We learned as part of the second part that using this, we can control, okay, all logs of our project plus all jars as well. Now we have another requirement into this category, that everything else should run as info. Okay, however, our application should run as, let's say, trace. How to make this differentiation? Okay, you can do this differentiation by using package. Okay, package is going to define. That is where, guys, packaging naming is very solid naming. com.hulkhighertech means no other company in the world is going to have this domain. hulkhighertech.com is our domain, so this will be unique to us only. Duplicacy cannot happen of this domain, right? So in the entire world, hulkhighertech.com is assigned to our company, so only we can use this configuration. So accordingly, based upon the packages, you can define, okay, what is your project? So our project is com.hulkhighertech.payments. So you can take this package structure and go to your property file and define something like this. Instead of root, you say logging.level.this package. Okay, so whichever package you want, that package and its sub packages will be considered. So under package is .controller, .service, .service ampl. So all the child packages will be considered, but this is how you can do package specific log configuration. Okay, if you say .root, it means it applies to all your classes and all the library classes also. If you put this and this, it will mean in general for everybody info is applicable. However, for you guys, nothing but whoever part of this package and its sub packages, for them this configuration is applicable. So if you specify something like trace here, that means only our code is going to go through trace now. Let's say we make this as a debug first of all, and we are doing a save. Okay, just check it out. Let's check it out. All the other library debug statements are not visible. Earlier infinite scrolling was happening here, now it is not visible. Okay, and what is the second thing? Earlier that problem, now what is the second thing? Second thing, when we call from this place, our statement is debug and above. For rest of the guys, info. For our packages, debug and above. Like that, package level configuration you can do. Okay, so this is what can be done. If you move it into trace, trace means trace and above. So let's quickly do a trace here. You go here, you again call, shoot, and here we are, trace and above. So guys, two things we have understood. Okay, in the coding part, we need to write these kind of methods, but logically, now when to use what methods, now we will discuss that part. But whatever methods are written, whether it will be printed or not, that is defined by certain external configuration. Okay, this external configuration is root applies for all. This is package specific configuration. So let me take this example and put it in our session notes also here. Like this we can configure. Okay, so isse hota hai. Now discuss about the first one. How to use the log level methods. Log level methods means these methods. When to use what in the application. When to use trace, when to use debug, when to use info. Guys, there is a meaning to all of that. Okay, let's try to understand the meaning. I will go back to the notepad. One liner meaning, it's not very complex. Let's understand it. When to use these log methods. Okay, one liner meaning is there. Let's understand it. First, we will just copy file, replace this with, let's say, hyphen, replace all. Go. Okay, this one. So when to use what method, let's understand. Okay, first of all, your thought process should be something like this. When you are writing the code, you will be using, currently for entire project, we have always used, guys, what? Info itself. Because we did not discuss it so far. This is the first time we are differentiating between these log statements. And we wanted our statements to always be printed, right? That is where everywhere we kept on writing info. But you should not always do infos. Okay, we always did info because we did not discuss the logging topic so far. So we applied infos for the entire project. But now you have to do it carefully. Everything will be same. Instead of info, if you make debug, no syntactical changes will come, but behavior will be different. So how to decide whether to use info, whether to use debug, that part we are discussing right now. Okay, so guys, we are not, it's still some more topic then left, but this we will touch as the last topic, as a closure topic today, and tomorrow at 10 we will start on this one. Okay, so this we will just close it as the last topic because it's already night time. It's 9:30 is going to happen in like 9 minutes. So we will just logically finish this piece and then we will close it. Tomorrow 10 a.m. we will continue with this topic also. Okay, further few more things are there, we will discuss that, and then we will go to Redis related caching. Okay, fine. Now coming back, this is the last portion which we are discussing, how to use these methods. Okay, how to use these methods. Your thought process should be something like this. If you are using info, your log statements will be printed in prod logs. Okay, do you want it? Is it valuable information for debugging in prod? These are the questions which should come into your mind. Okay, if the information is valuable, you need it for debugging in production. Dekho guys, you cannot say tomorrow your code is deployed into production and a bug comes and your lead is saying, okay, investigate the production logs. Somehow he goes to the logs, give you the access to check, and then you say, "Arey, my log statements are not there. I don't know. My statement itself are not printed." You cannot be in that situation. So all the important statements which you feel will help for investigation, you have to put that in info mode. Okay, because production may only info comes. You cannot tell the statement, I did not enable the log, so I cannot tell you. Okay, so first thing, when do you use info? If you want something to be printed in production, it has to be info, and all important things has to be in info, because production may info will be printed. That's your thought process. Okay, you need something more, but you don't want it to run in the production. Okay, this is needed, but you needed for development time, but you don't want to run in prod. That you choose it as a debug mode. Okay, so you guaranteed want it during your development time for your analysis, but you don't want it to run in a production related system. All those statements, you put it into debug mode. Now, depending upon whatever logic you are writing, accordingly you can make a decision. You don't want certain statements in prod, but need it during dev time. Okay, put it into debug. Trace. Trace is more granular than debug. Means even one level down. Means too granular, sometimes very nested. Okay, very nested, very deeper level coding you are doing. For loop, while loop, this loop, that loop. And it is very deeper level logic. For those cases, too much of internal nesting is there, very granular. Those things you put it under trace. Means generally in all your environments, dev, QA, UAT, nobody is going to run it in a trace mode. They will be setting it to run it in a debug mode. Trace is one level so down, which gives one more deeper aspect of your code. And maybe you want it to temporarily do certain testing for your feature, then you will set up. So you need to understand prod runs in info, prod runs in info, and all your non-prod, okay, all non-prod will run in debug. UAT might run in info again, it depends, okay? But dev environment, QA environment, that people will generally run it in a debug mode. How they do that is, okay, just like this. So root is always going to be info only. They don't change anything in root. Root stays info because it applies to all the other jars also. We don't want to change their behavior. So root you will keep always in info, but your application level for all non-prod systems, dev, QA, sometimes UAT. UAT is debatable whether you want info or debug, but for all the others, debug mode will be utilized. So statements of trace will not be visible. So trace means one more layer down. If you specifically want to have that logging, then you put it under trace mode. That is what it is. More granular logging that debug. Okay, generally, even in non-prod, this will not be enabled. Okay, however, if you need this for certain testing, then you enable and deploy changes. That is what is trace level. So ideally, this is too deeper. This is only in non-prod you want, not in production. This is something which should be there in production. And next, these two are very self-explanatory. Whenever error or exception happens in the system, you put it using logger.error. When error or exception happens in system, you put it like this. Warning, okay? Like the name says, any warning you see, something like warning, concerning, anything concerning for the application, you can choose logger.warn. What could be concerning? It depends on logic, right? So let's say you have written a logic where it is taking more than 5 seconds for processing something. So you can do that kind of check. If the processing time is greater than 5, then logger.warn, you are putting that kind of warning message. So then it will be shown in different. If you see this, if you check this thing out, error is shown in red, warn is shown in orange. So some significance is there. Color highlighting is also happening. Even though, forget about this color highlighting, okay, just the name itself, warn, you can just refer. Whenever warn is there, it means yes, something, warning, something has gone wrong. If you want to just put warning messages, use the warn. General day-to-day logging that you do, you have to go ahead with these two things only. Whenever exception comes, you have to go for this. If you feel something is kind of a warning, then you go for a warn. Otherwise, not required to touch warn. Very less frequently used ones. Okay? More commonly, debug and info. Now, I will give you one simple way to look at this, and then we can conclude the today's topic. How you should think about this is, so this is fine. This is a basic thought process, how you should go forward. But generally, how you do it in the code. Some time ago, we gave this for loop example, right? My strong recommendation for all you guys is For all important methods, first thing, when you enter the method, maybe here some parameters are there, param, param1, param2. First thing, when you are starting your method, always log it in info. देखो guys, know that these logs are for debugging purpose, for future investigation purpose. It is not time pass. So you have to put something like logger.info. Always first statement you put logger.info, and as part of that print these two values. देखो, what will happen is if something goes wrong in production, you can go to the source code and then you can compare it with the log statements, and you will find, oh, this method first statement it read param1 and param2 values. These values are printed. Now you're smart, you can read the rest of the code and understand based upon this param1 and param2 what might have happened in the code. So all recommended practices, always for all important methods, statement should be logger.info and print the parameters. Second, whenever you are returning from that method, if you have a return type, generally you have to write again an info with whatever return type value you are going to give back. So after this, let's say you do return whatever your return value. Okay, by this way you will have a cut entry what happened, exit what happened. So put these two things in info only. Other things within the method, whatever logic you feel is important for tracking in production, all of that you can put in info. That is your choice. Okay. However, you should avoid too much of these kind of nesting, like 1000 times printing. These things you don't put it in info mode. Okay, whatever these big time nestings and for loops, iske andar don't write much of info modes because it is going to really add too many statements. So first thought process is beginning and ending, write info. Next, anything important, use info, but avoid writing in too much of nesting because it will print many times. So consider that as the thought process. Okay, beginning and ending, put info statements. Next, in middle of method, based on need, okay, in middle of method, if you feel something is important in prod, then put that in info. Okay, else use debug within the method. Okay, something which you don't want to go have it in the production system, write it in debug mode. Okay, for example, even when we are going here, whether to print this in a info mode, debug mode, it is completely your choice. If you feel these 100 statements are important, you need it. Dekho guys, when there is this kind of debate happening in your mind, should I use debug or should I use info because it's making both sense, go ahead with info. Okay, at least let it be printed, because if it is not printed you cannot debug. So if your mind is juggling between should your debug go or info go, use infos. Okay, at least the statement will come. It will take more memory, that is fine, but at least you can investigate. If you don't print it, it's a problem. But it is completely your choice. If you feel this statement is not important in production, you can put it logger.debug. And the nesting here is definitely not important, so we can put in log dot maybe here trace, and here we can also put log dot trace. But you feel no, these 1000 statements are important for my debugging in the non-prod system also, make it log.debug. Then what should you write then after this? Maybe you can summarize the outcome when this loop ran. After that, it might be doing certain logic, maybe working on a list or calculating some value. Maybe when that value comes outside, let's say there is a value here, you are working on some value, maybe a list or an int or something. You did some computation on that in this for loop. Whatever is the final value which is coming outside, maybe if you are interested, you can put that into log.info. So that means systematically, smartly, you can use these all statements. Wherever too much of nesting is happening, there you don't get into infos, but a summary of that logic you can still put in info, which helps you in debugging purpose. Okay. Or if in production you need this, yes, go ahead info. If you need it only for non-prod, go ahead debug. Too much granular, always have trace, and initial and ending should always be logged. This is how you do it. Plus, whenever there is a confusion, should I go between this and this? Okay, always go ahead with this. But make sure too much of detailed you're not writing with info. There are certain logics like this. Beginning and the ending, put info. In the middle, if you feel something is important in prod, then put info. Then otherwise, go ahead with debug. Next, you can write summary result of your for loop execution in info. Okay, so you can have some results rather than writing it here and processing so many number of times. You can write it here, it is good enough. Or maybe even outside this for loop you can write some summary information, that is also fine. Log.info, that is also fine. Okay, so these are the multiple thought processes which you need to do when you decide how to use these methods in your code. Okay, so different case per different methods, but whether these methods will be printed or not, that depends upon external configuration, which is controlled basically in property files via these places. Okay, okay guys, are we clear with this? Are we clear with this, guys? Okay, for now let us understand only this. Tomorrow when we connect, we will discuss XML based configuration because it is more handy, and then we will go to file related console versus file related tracking. After that we will continue with our next topic, which is Redis system. Okay, so chalo guys, thank you everybody. There is no attendance tracking for this. I will share you the recordings right now itself here and update it into our Google Drive also. Chalo, thank you everybody. Have a great day. Good night everyone. See you tomorrow 10 a.m. back again. Okay, thank you all. Have a great day everybody. Practice this today's topic. Simple hai. Use these loggers and just understand these configurations. 3-4 things only, key things to understand. Chalo, thanks all. Have a great day. Stopping this. Chalo guys, carry on. Thank you. Have a great day, guys. Chalo, bye. Stop.